The first reports were missing, believed killed, but they changed to missing, believed to be a prisoner. Melanie, her hopes alive again, met every train, praying for a letter. She refused to obey Dr. Meade and stay in bed, and one afternoon she fainted at the station, and Rhett Butler brought her home.
"Mrs. Wilkes, you're going to have a baby, aren't you?" he said.
And when she gave an embarrassed nod, he went on.
"Then you must take better care of yourself, or you'll harm the baby. I'll talk to some people I know in Washington. If Mr. Wilkes is a prisoner, he'll be on a prisoner's list. And if he isn't, well, there's nothing worse than not knowing. But you must promise me you'll take care of yourself, or I won't help."
"Oh, you're so kind," cried Melanie. A month later, Rhett brought news that Ashley was not dead, but at Rock Island, a cruel and terrible prison in Illinois, where many men would die before the end of the war.
"He had a chance to get out, but refused it," said Rhett. "The Yankees need men to fight the Indians in the West, and any prisoner who will join the Yankee Army and fight the Indians for 2 years can get out of prison."
"Why didn't he do that?" cried Scarlett. "Why didn't he join, and then run away and come home as soon as he got out?" Melanie became angry. "How can you suggest that? I'd prefer to know he was dead at Rock Island than he was no longer a Confederate but a Yankee soldier. Of course he refused." When Scarlett was alone with Rhett, she asked, "Wouldn't you join the Yankees to get out of that place and then run away?"
"Of course,"
said Rhett with a cold smile. "Then why didn't Ashley?" said Scarlett.
"He's a gentleman,"
said Rhett, meaning Ashley was a fool. Chapter 7. News from Tara. That summer, for the first time since the war began, the people of Atlanta heard the sound of battle. The Yankees were getting closer. Many old men, like John Wilkes, and young boys like Phil Meade were sent to guard the bridges at Chattahoochee River, at the back of the main Confederate Army. Then, on a hot July afternoon, after a terrible battle at Peachtree Creek, a stream of Confederate soldiers began to arrive in Atlanta. Some were covered in blood, others helped those who couldn't walk to get to the hospitals. Within days, the Yankees were on 3 sides of Atlanta, and the railway to Tennessee was under Yankee control. Only one railway to the south, to Macon, was still open. But if they could hold it, Atlanta could stand against the Yankees. But when shells began to fall in the streets, women, children, and old people began leaving the city. Mrs. Elsing and Mrs. Merriweather refused to leave. They were needed at the hospital, they said proudly, and no Yankee was going to run them out of their homes. Mrs. Meade also refused. Phil was fighting not far away, and she wanted to be near. Aunt Pitty was among the first to leave. She went to Macon to stay with a cousin. "You girls should come with me," she said. But Scarlett did not like Aunt Pitty's cousin. "I'll go to Tara, and Melanie can go to Macon with you," she said. "Scarlett, "Don't leave me!" cried Melanie. "I'll die if you aren't with me when the baby comes. You promised Ashley that you'd take care of me. He told me he was going to ask you." "I'll keep my promise," Scarlet said tiredly, "but I won't go to Macon. I'll go home to Tara, and you can come with me." But Dr. Meade stopped Melanie going to Macon or Tara. "You cannot travel," he said. "It might be dangerous. Miss Pitty, you go to Macon and leave the young ladies here. Miss Melanie, you must stay in bed until the baby comes." He spoke privately to Scarlet. "She is going to have a difficult time," he said. "You must stay with her until the baby comes. With these shells falling, it may be at any time." So Aunt Pitty went to Macon, taking Uncle Peter with her, and Scarlet and Melanie were left alone in Atlanta with Wade and Prissy. Those first days, Scarlet would not go into the streets. Every time she heard the scream of a shell coming, she rushed to Melanie's room and threw herself on the bed, and the two of them hid their heads in the pillow. Prissy and Wade hid under a table downstairs, Wade crying and Prissy screaming. "I'd rather let Melanie die than go out and find the doctor when the shells are falling," thought Scarlet. But Prissy calmed Scarlet's fears. "Don't you worry, Miss Scarlet. I know all about delivering babies," she said. "Ain't my mother told me all about it? Just leave it to me." At the end of July, Scarlet received a letter from Gerald telling her that Kareen was ill with typhoid and that Scarlet must not come home. That night, she sat outside the house and thought of Tara. Life there would never be the same. She would never again hear the wild, happy voices of the Tarleton boys, or the Monroe boys, or little Joe Fontaine, or... The front gate opened, and she quickly brushed tears from her face before looking up. It was Rhett Butler. "So you didn't go to Macon," he said. "Why did you stay?" "To be with Melanie. Well, she can't go just now." "Is Mrs. Wilkes still here?" he said. He lit a cigar. "And you stayed with her. How strange." "I see nothing strange about it," she said uncomfortably. "You think Mrs. Wilkes is silly and stupid," he said. "So why do you stay when there are Yankee shells falling all around?" "Because she's Charlie's sister, and like a sister to me," said Scarlet, her cheeks getting hot. "You mean because she's Ashley Wilkes's widow," said Rhett. Scarlet became angry. She liked to think she was a mystery to men, but Rhett could see through her like glass. He took her hand in his. "How lucky to find you alone," he said, and something in his voice made her face go hot again. "He's going to tell me he loves me," she thought. "Then I can tell him he's wasting his time, and he'll feel a fool." He kissed her hand, and something electric passed through her whole body as his warm mouth touched her skin. "I'm not in love with him," she told herself. "I'm in love with Ashley." "Scarlet, you do like me, don't you?" he said. "Well, "Sometimes," she said.
"Could you ever love me?"
"I've got him," she thought, and answered in a cool voice, "Certainly not. Not until you behave like a real gentleman."
"And I don't intend to do that," he said. "So you don't love me? Good, because although I like you, Scarlet, I don't love you, and I didn't want to be the second man not to return your love, my dear."
You don't love me?" she said.
"Did you hope that I did? I'm sorry, but I do like you a lot. I know you still think lovingly of the wooden-headed Mr. Wilkes, who has probably been dead these last 6 months, but there must be room in your heart for me, too. Scarlet, I want you more than I've ever wanted any woman."
Scarlet was surprised and confused. "Are you asking me to marry you?" she said.
He dropped her hand and laughed loudly. "No, I'm not a marrying man. Didn't I tell you that?"
But what?"
"My dear," he said quietly, "I'm asking you to be my lover."
"Lover?" Scarlet felt shock and disappointment at the same time. "Get out!" she cried. "Get out and don't ever come back! I'll tell my father, and he'll kill you!" She watched him smile. He was not ashamed. He was amused. She ran into the house and tried to crash the door shut behind her, but it was too heavy.
"May I help you?"
he asked, and he crashed it shut for her as she ran upstairs. As the hot, noisy days of August came to an end, the shelling stopped. Then worrying news came from the South. The Yankees were trying to take the railway at Jonesboro, and Tara was close to the fighting. Eventually a soldier came to say that the Confederate Army had pushed the Yankees back, but the railway was damaged, and it would be some time before trains could travel again. He brought Scarlet a letter from her father after meeting him in Jonesboro, and was able to tell her that the Yankees hadn't got to Tara. "But what was Pa doing in Jonesboro?" she asked. The soldier looked nervous. He was looking for an army doctor to go to Tara with him," he said. Scarlet opened her father's letter and began to read. "Dear daughter, your mother and both girls have typhoid and are very ill, but we must hope for the best. When your mother went to her bed, she told me to write and say that you must not come home and put yourself and Wade in danger too. She sends her love and asks you to pray for her." For the next week, Scarlet waited nervously for more news, but none came. No one knew where the Confederates were or what the Yankees were doing. She had seen enough typhoid in the Atlanta hospitals to know that a week was a long time with that terrible illness, and she wanted to be at home. "Oh, why doesn't this baby come?" she thought. The last day of August arrived, and with it came rumors of a big battle south of Atlanta. People waited for news. If the Yankees won the Macon Railway, they would soon be in Atlanta. On the 1st of September, Scarlet woke to hear a sound like distant thunder. Rain coming, she thought at first. Then she went to the window. No, not rain, guns! And from the south! There lay Jonesboro, Tara, and her mother. Scarlet went to Melanie's room. Melanie was in bed, her eyes closed and with dark circles around them. She looked worse than any sick person Scarlet had ever seen. Then her eyes opened, and a soft, warm smile lit her face. "Scarlet," she said, "there's something I want to ask you." Scarlet sat down on the bed, and Melanie held her hand. "I'm sorry about the guns, dear," said Melanie. "They're towards Jonesboro, aren't they? I know how worried you are. You could be at home if it weren't for me, couldn't you?" "Yes," said Scarlet rudely. "Oh, you're so good to me, and I love you for it. If I die, I want you to take my baby. Will you do that?" Scarlet pulled her hand away, frightened. "Don't be silly, Melanie," she said. "You're not going to die." "Promise me, Scarlet, then I won't be afraid," said Melanie. "I'm sure my baby will come today." "Oh, all right, I promise," said Scarlet. "Why do you think it will come today?" "I've been having pains." "I'll send Prissy for Dr. Meade," said Scarlet. "No, you know how busy he is. Just send for Mrs. Meade." Chapter 8. The Yankees Are Coming. Scarlet sent Prissy for Mrs. Meade, and, after a long time, the little black girl returned alone. "She wasn't there," said Prissy. "She got news that Mr. Phil was shot, and she went with a carriage to fetch him home." Scarlet stared, wanting to shake her. "Well, don't just stand there. Go and fetch Mrs. Merriweather." "She ain't there," said Prissy. "I stopped on my way home, but the house was shut up. She's probably at the hospital." Scarlet thought for a moment. "Go to Mrs. Elsing and explain everything," she said. "Ask her to come, and hurry." She went back to Melanie's room, where Melanie was lying on her side, her face white. "Mrs. Meade is at the hospital," lied Scarlet. She didn't want to worry Melanie by telling her about Phil getting shot. "But Mrs. Elsing is coming." It was an hour before Prissy came back, walking slowly along the road. Scarlet hurried out to meet her. "Mrs. Elsing is over at the hospital," said Prissy. "A lot of soldiers came in on the early train. Most of them hurt bad." "You must go to the hospital," said Scarlet. "I'll give you a letter for Dr. Meade, but if he isn't there, give it to one of the other doctors. And hurry back this time." Minutes later, Prissy went off with a letter, and Scarlet went back upstairs. Melanie asked no questions, but her face was full of pain. An hour passed, and then another. Afternoon came, and Melanie's pains were worse. Where was Prissy? Why didn't she come? Scarlet went to the window. Had the sound of the guns died away, or was it her imagination? Then she saw Prissy running down the street, fear written all over her little black face. Scarlet quickly moved from the window. "I'll get some cooler water," she told Melanie. She got downstairs as Prissy came in. "They're fighting at Jonesboro, Miss Scarlet. They say we're losing the war." "Where's Dr. Meade? When is he coming?" said Scarlet. "He ain't at the hospital. Mrs. Merriweather and Mrs. Elson ain't there either. A man told me the doctor was down at the railway station with the soldiers from Jonesboro. But, Miss Scarlet, I was too frightened to go down there. People are dying down there, and I'm frightened of dead people." "What about the other doctors?" asked Scarlet. "Miss Scarlet, I couldn't get them to read your letter," said Prissy. "They're working in the hospital like they're all crazy. Don't worry me about babies when we've got men dying here," one of them shouted at me. "Listen," said Scarlet. "I'll get Dr. Meade and you sit with Miss Melanie. Don't tell her where the fighting is, and don't tell her that the other doctors won't come. Do you hear?" Scarlet hurried out of the house and into the hot sun. A soldier came riding past, and she stopped him. "Are the Yankees coming?" she asked him.
"Yes, miss," he said. "The army are leaving Atlanta soon."
Scarlet began to run. People rushed past her as she pushed her way through the crowd and on towards the station. But as she went round the side of the Atlanta Hotel, she stopped. There, lying on the ground under the heat of the sun, were hundreds and hundreds of men. Some were screaming with pain. There was blood everywhere, and the smell of unwashed bodies came to meet her. She put a hand across her mouth and nose. Then she lifted her skirts and stepped over dead men, and men with blood on their uniforms, and men making sounds which had to mean, "Water, water." "Dr. Meade!" cried Scarlet. "Is Dr. Meade here?" A man looked up. It was the doctor. His shirt and trousers were red with blood, and his face was gray with tiredness.
"Thank God you're here," he said to Scarlet. "I can use every pair of hands. Quickly, come here."
She went to him as fast as she could across the rows of bodies. "Doctor, you must come. Melanie is having her baby."
"Baby?"
thundered the doctor.
"Are you crazy? I can't leave these men. Get some woman to help you. Get my wife."
She started to tell him why Mrs. Meade could not come, then stopped. She could not tell him his son was hurt. "Doctor, please," she cried. "Please come." He looked at her.
"The Yankees are coming, and the army is moving out of town. I don't know what they'll do with these men. There aren't any trains. The Macon line is under Yankee control. Listen, I can't promise, Scarlet, but I'll try."
Scarlet went back through the rows of men. On the streets beyond the Atlanta Hotel, soldiers were moving out of the city. There seemed to be thousands of them. Wagons went past, throwing up clouds of dust. There were drunken women with painted faces among the crowd. Scarlet saw Belle Watling, and heard her drunken laugh as she held on to a one-armed soldier. Scarlet began to run again. When she got back to the house, Wade was waiting outside. "Wade hungry!" he cried. "Be quiet!" said Scarlet. "Go and play in the back garden." She looked up and saw Prissy at the bedroom window. Scarlet waved at her to come down, then went into the house. Prissy came down the stairs 3 at a time. "The doctors can't come," said Scarlet. "You've got to deliver the baby, and I'll help you." Prissy's mouth fell open. "What's the matter?" said Scarlet. Miss Scarlet, I don't know nothing about delivering babies," said Prissy, looking at the floor. Scarlet took Prissy's arm and squeezed it. "You black liar! What do you mean? You said you knew everything about—" "I was lying, Miss Scarlet," cried Prissy. Scarlet had never hit a slave in all her life, but she hit Prissy's black cheek as hard as she could. Prissy screamed loudly and tried to pull away. "Scarlet, is it you?" Melanie's weak voice came from upstairs. "Please come. Please." Scarlet tried to remember what Mammy and Ellen did when Wade was born. "Build a fire and make sure there's plenty of water," she told Prissy. "Bring all the towels you can find, and some string, and a pair of scissors. Quickly!" She pushed Prissy towards the kitchen, then took a deep breath before going upstairs. There was never an afternoon as long as this one, or as hot. Scarlet pulled the bedroom curtains across to keep out the sun. Melanie tried to be brave, but when evening came, she began calling for Ashley, over and over, until Scarlet wanted to cover her face with a pillow. "Perhaps the doctor will come after all," thought Scarlet, and she told Prissy to go to the Meads' house and see if he or Mrs. Mead were there. Prissy went, but came back soon after, alone. "The doctor ain't been home all day," she reported. "And, Miss Scarlet, Mr. Phil is dead. He was shot. I didn't see Mrs. Mead because she was getting his body ready for—" "All right," said Scarlet quickly. Melanie opened her eyes and whispered, "Are the Yankees coming?" "No," said Scarlet. "Prissy's a liar." "Yes, miss, I am," agreed Prissy. "The Yankees are coming," whispered Melanie, guessing correctly. "Oh, my poor baby, Scarlet, you mustn't stay here." "You know I won't leave you," said Scarlet. "Why not?" said Melanie. "I'm going to die anyway." Chapter 9. Escape from Atlanta. Scarlet came down the dark stairs slowly, like an old woman. She went outside and sat on the front step. It was all over. Melanie was not dead, and Prissy was giving the small baby boy his first bath while Melanie was asleep. The night air was cool and fresh on her face and arms. More soldiers were leaving the city, passing by the house, although she could not see them clearly in the darkness. What could she do? Where could she turn for help? Scarlet remembered Rhett. He was strong and clever, and he wasn't afraid of the Yankees. And he had a horse and carriage, too. She called Prissy. "Captain Butler lives at the Atlanta Hotel," she said. Go there quickly and tell him about the baby. Tell him that I want him to get us out of here." "Suppose Captain Butler ain't at the hotel," said Prissy. "Go to the barrooms, go to Belle Watling's house," said Scarlet. "Just find him, or the Yankees will get us all." Scarlet went back into the house and waited. After some time, she saw that the sky was becoming pink over the east of the city. Then a large flame shot high into the darkness. "The Yankees are burning the city," she thought. Moments later, Prissy ran into the room. "The Yankees?" Scarlet began. "No, it's our men," said Prissy. "They're burning the gun factory and what the army left. We're all going to burn up." "Did you see Captain Butler?" said Scarlet. "Yes, I saw him, and I says, 'Come quick, Captain Butler, and bring your horse and carriage.' And he says they took his horse, but he'll steal another one." "He's coming? He's going to bring a horse?" "So he says." Scarlet began to feel better. She would forgive Rhett anything if he got them out of this mess. "Wake up Wade and dress him," she told Prissy. "Then pack some clothes for all of us. Don't tell Miss Melanie we're going. Not yet. But put 2 thick towels around the baby and pack his clothes too." It seemed hours before Rhett finally came with a wagon. He was dressed as if he was going dancing, in a white coat and trousers. He carried 2 guns, and his pockets were full of bullets.
"Good evening," he said, smiling and taking off his hat. "Fine weather we're having. I hear you're going on a trip."
"If you make any jokes, I'll never speak to you again," said Scarlet, her voice shaking.
"You're frightened?"
He pretended to be surprised. "Yes, I am. And if you had any sense, you'd be frightened too," she said. "We must get out of here."
"And where are you going?"
he asked politely. "I'm going home," she said.
"You mean to Tara?"
he said.
"Scarlet, are you mad? The Yankees may be all over Tara by now. You can't go right through the Yankee army."
"I will go home," she cried, tears running down her cheeks. Suddenly she was in his arms. His hand smoothed her hair gently, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle too. "Don't cry, my brave little girl," he said. "I'll take you home." Rhett turned west along the narrow street, and the wheel of the wagon hit a stone so hard that Melanie cried out in the back of the wagon. Wade and Prissy were next to her with the new baby. Scarlet was in the front, next to Rhett. "Must we go through the fire?" she asked him.
"Not if we hurry,"
he said. He stopped the horse suddenly.
"Soldiers,"
he said. Long lines of Confederate soldiers walked through Marietta Street, too tired to care about the burning buildings around them. Many had no shoes, and their uniforms were torn and dirty. They went past silently, like ghosts.
"Take a good look,"
said Rhett,
"so you can tell your grandchildren that you saw the last soldiers of the sacred cause."
Suddenly, she hated him for insulting these broken men. She thought of Charles, of Ashley, who might be dead, and all those brave young boys now dead. She forgot that she had once thought they were fools. Rhett watched the soldiers with a strange and thoughtful look on his face. Then there was a crash of falling wood, and Scarlet saw a thin flame above the building next to them. "Rhett, hurry!" she shouted. They went quickly from one narrow street to another until the sound of the flames died behind them. Rhett did not speak. His face looked cold and hard, as if he'd forgotten where he was. Scarlet wanted him to say something, anything, but he only sat and stared at the dark road ahead. "Oh, Rhett," she said, "I'm so glad you aren't in the army." At this, he turned his head, and she saw in his eyes how angry and confused he was. After that, she said nothing. At last, they were on a wider, smoother road. "We're out of the city," said Rhett. "Do you still want to do this crazy thing? The Yankee army are between you and Tara." "Yes," she said. "Please, Rhett, let's hurry." "You can't go to Jonesboro down this road," he said. "They've been fighting up and down there all day. Do you know any wagon paths?" "Oh, yes," cried Scarlet. "I know a wagon path. Pa and I used to ride it. It comes out only a mile from Tara." "Good," said Rhett. "Maybe the Yankees aren't there yet. Maybe you can get through if—" "I can get through? Aren't you going to take us?" "No," he said. "I'm leaving you here." "Leaving us?" she said wildly. "Where are you going?" "I'm going with the army," he said. "Rhett, stop joking." "I'm not joking, my dear," he said, smiling. "Think how delighted our soldiers will be at my last-minute appearance." "Oh, Rhett!" she cried. "Why are you going?" He laughed. "Perhaps because I'm a Southerner, and I'm ashamed. Who knows?" "You should die of shame, leaving us alone and helpless." "Scarlet, anyone as selfish and strong-minded as you is never helpless. God help the Yankees if they get you." He stepped down from the wagon. Then he put his hands up, caught her under the arms, and brought her to the ground next to him. He took her several steps away from the wagon. "I'm not asking you to understand or forgive," he said. "I'll never understand or forgive myself for this foolishness. But the South needs every man, so I'm off to the wars." His warm, strong hands moved up her arms. "I do love you, Scarlet, although I told you I didn't. Do you want to change your mind about what I suggested before? A soldier would go to his death with beautiful memories." He was kissing her now, with slow, hot lips. Charles had never kissed her like this. The kisses of the Tarleton and Calvert boys never made her go hot and cold like this. A voice came from the wagon. It was Wade's. "Wade frightened!" And suddenly Scarlet remembered that she was frightened too, and that Rhett was leaving her, and on top of it all, he was insulting her with his shocking suggestions. She pulled herself away from him. "You coward!" she screamed. "You nasty, horrible thing!" And she hit him across the mouth with all her strength. He put a hand to his face. "I see," he said quietly. "Go on!" cried Scarlet. "I don't want to see you ever again! I hope a shell lands right on you! I hope it blows you into 1,000,000 pieces! I hope—"
"Never mind the rest," said Rhett, smiling. "I understand your general idea." He walked back to the wagon. "Mrs. Wilkes?"
Prissy's frightened voice answered from the wagon. "Miss Melanie fainted a long way back, Captain Butler."
"That's probably best," he said. "If she was awake, I doubt that she could live through all the pain. Take good care of her, Prissy."
He turned round.
"Goodbye, Scarlet."
Scarlet knew he was looking at her, but she did not speak. She saw his big shoulders moving in the dark. Then he was gone. She came slowly back to the wagon, her knees shaking. She put her head against the neck of the horse and cried. Chapter 10. Home. Many times on that journey, Scarlet heard soldiers coming, and had to hide the wagon in fields among the trees, then wait while the men went past like ghosts in the darkness. She lost her way and cried when she could not find the little wagon path she knew so well. But a few miles after she found it, the horse dropped to its knees, too tired to go any further. Scarlet climbed into the back of the wagon, heard Melanie whisper, "Scarlet, can I have some water, please?" and heard herself answer, "There isn't any," before she went to sleep. When she woke, the sun was pouring through the trees, and everything was silent. She sat up and looked round quickly, but there were no soldiers anywhere. In the wagon, Melanie lay so still and white that at first Scarlet thought she must be dead, but then she saw Melanie's shallow breathing. They were under some trees in someone's front garden, Scarlet noticed. "It's the Mallory place," she thought, excited at the thought of friends and help. But the stillness of death lay over the plantation, and when she looked towards the house, there were only some smoke-blackened stones left. "Is this what Tara will be like?" she thought. She woke Prissy, then looked over and saw that Melanie's eyes were open. Scarlet found some apples under the trees, then got some water from a stream near the house. They all had a drink. Then Scarlet gave the rest of the water to the horse. The animal was on its feet again, but it was very old, she saw now. They were 15 miles from Tara, but the horse moved so slowly it took all day to travel there. Every empty, burned-out house they passed frightened Scarlet more. There were dead men and dead horses lying by the road, and the fields and trees seemed full of ghosts in the afternoon sun. There was a sudden noise, and Prissy screamed loudly. But it was only a cow coming from behind some trees. The animal looked at them with large, frightened eyes. "She needs milking," said Prissy. "It must be one of Mr. McIntosh's that the Yankees didn't get," said Scarlet. "We'll take it with us. Then we can have some milk for the baby." It was evening when they reached the top of a hill and went down through the line of trees that led to Tara. Was it there? Or was the darkness hiding just a few smoke-blackened stones like the McIntosh place? But no, Tara had escaped. It was there. The white wall showed through the darkness. Then Scarlet saw a shadow come from inside the house. Someone was home. A shout of delight started in her throat, but died there. The shadow did not move or call to her, but stiffly and slowly came down the steps. "Pa?" she whispered. "It's me, Scarlet. I've come home." Her father looked at her. "Daughter," he said. "Daughter." He's an old man, thought Scarlet, shocked. A baby's cry came from the wagon, and Gerald looked across. "It's Melanie and her baby," whispered Scarlet. "She's very ill. I brought her home." Gerald went to the wagon, straightening his shoulders. "Cousin Melanie," he said. 12 Oaks is burned. You must stay with us." "We must carry her," said Scarlet. "She can't walk." Another person came from the house. It was Pork, Gerald's personal slave. He ran down the steps. "Miss Scarlet!" Scarlet caught him by the arms and felt his tears on her hands as he held them. Glad you're back," he cried. It was Pork who carried Melanie indoors. Prissy took the baby. Wade followed them up the steps into the house. Scarlet caught her father's arm before he could follow too. "Did they get well, Pa?" she said. "The girls are getting better," he said. "Your mother—" "Yes?" "Your mother died yesterday," said Gerald. Gerald said it over and over again as he followed Scarlet around the house. "She died yesterday. She died yesterday." Scarlet felt nothing except a great tiredness. She would think of Mother later, or she would simply cry and cry. Later, when she was alone with her father, she asked, "Why didn't the Yankees burn Tara?" "They used the house for offices," said Gerald. "Yankees? In this house?" The thought made her feel sick. "They were, daughter," said Gerald. "We saw the smoke from 12 Oaks before they came. But Miss Honey and Miss India were in Macon, so we didn't worry about them. We couldn't go to Macon. The girls were so sick. Your mother... we couldn't go.
Our Negroes ran away. They stole the wagons and the horses. Only Mammy, Dilsey, and Pork stayed. The Yankees came up the road from the river, and I met them at the front door."
"Oh, brave little Gerald," thought Scarlet.
"They told me to leave," went on Gerald. "They told me they were going to burn the place. I told them that we had typhoid in the house, and they would burn it over the heads of 3 dying women. The young officer was a gentleman."
"A Yankee gentleman?
"Pa! A gentleman," said Gerald. "He rode away and came back with an army doctor who looked at the girls and your mother."
You let a Yankee into their room?"
"He had medicine, and we had none. He saved your sisters," said Gerald. "They didn't burn the house. They moved in. The officers filled all the rooms except the sick room, and the soldiers lived in tents around the place. They killed the cows, the chickens, and the pigs. They took the pictures and some of the furniture."
And Mother? Did she know Yankees were in the house?"
"She never knew anything."
"Thank God," said Scarlet.
"And then they moved on."
He was silent for a long time, and then he held her hand.
"I'm glad you're home," he said simply.
After Gerald went to bed, Scarlet went to the room where Corinne and Sue Ellen were sleeping. Mammy was there, watching them. Her eyes lit up when she saw Scarlet. "My child is home," Mammy said softly. "Oh, Miss Scarlet, now that Miss Ellen is dead, what are we going to do?" Scarlet sat down next to the bed. "I want you to tell me about Mother," she said. "I just couldn't ask Pa about her." Tears came from Mammy's eyes. "It was those slattery trash that killed Miss Ellen. I told her not to—" "Slatteries?" Scarlet was confused. "Emmy Slattery was sick with typhoid, and Miss Ellen went to nurse her," said Mammy. "I told her to leave those white trash alone, but she didn't listen. Then, when Emmy was getting better, Miss Corinne went down with typhoid, and then Miss Sue Ellen. So Miss Ellen had to nurse them, too. With all the fighting up the road, and the Yankees across the river, and the field Negroes running off every night, I was nearly crazy with worry. But Miss Ellen was cool and calm, except that she worried because we couldn't get medicines. And then she went down with typhoid, too." Mammy dried her tears before she went on. "Miss Ellen went fast, Miss Scarlet. Even that nice Yankee doctor couldn't do anything for her. She died a few nights after the cotton burned." "Has the cotton gone?" said Scarlet. "Tell me." "Yes, Miss Scarlet. The Yankees burned it." 3 years cotton, thought Scarlet. $150,000 in one big fire. Chapter 11. Murder. Next morning, when Scarlet went down to breakfast, Gerald was sitting at the table. As Scarlet sat down, he said,
"We will wait for Mrs. O'Hara. She is late."
Scarlet stared at him. He was looking at her in a strange and confused way, and his hands were shaking. "Has Pa lost his mind?" thought Scarlet. "No, he'll get better. He must get better. I won't think about it now. I won't think of him or Mother or any of these awful things." She left the room without eating. Pork was outside the house. "Have you been over to 12 Oaks or the Macintosh place to see if there's anything left in the gardens that we can eat?" Scarlet asked him.
"No, miss," said Pork. "We ain't left Tara."
"You go to Macintosh, and I'll go to 12 Oaks," she said. The road was hot and dusty, but she was hungry, and they needed food from somewhere. At the bottom of the hill was the river, and Scarlet took off her shoes and put her feet into the cool water before going on to 12 Oaks. It was burned down, and just a few blackened stones were left of the house where she had danced and flirted with the men, and dreamed her dreams of marrying Ashley. "Oh, Ashley, I hope you are dead," she thought. "I don't want you to see this." She walked to the garden and found some potatoes in the soft earth. Without stopping to clean it, Scarlet picked up a potato and began to eat. But it was old, and the taste was bitter, and Scarlet was sick almost immediately. Then she lay down, her face against the earth, and thought of the people who were dead, the way of life that had gone forever, and the dark and frightening future. But the past was the past, Scarlet told herself, sitting up. Those lazy, happy old days were gone, never to return. There was no going back. "I'm going to live through this," she said aloud. "And when it's over, I'm never going to be hungry again. If I have to steal or kill, as God is my witness, I'm never going to be hungry again." After 2 weeks, she knew that her father would never get any better. He would always be waiting for Ellen, always listening for her. When Scarlet asked him for advice, his only answer was, "Do what you think best, daughter." One morning, she was at the open window of her bedroom. She had hurt her foot and was sitting in a chair. Melanie was in her room with the children. Corinne and Sue Ellen were in their room, and Gerald, Mammy, Pork, and Dilsey were in the fields. Scarlet was wondering how they were going to buy food. The only money in the house was Confederate money, and that had almost no value now. "And if I can get my hands on some money," she thought, "how can we carry food from Jonesboro to Tara?" The old horse that brought them from Atlanta had died. It was while she was worrying that she heard the sound of a horse. She looked up quickly and saw a Yankee soldier. He was a rough-looking man with an untidy black beard and a gun, and he was getting off his horse outside the front door. Scarlet heard him come into the house and walk through the rooms downstairs. In a moment, she thought, he'll walk into the kitchen. There, cooking over the fire in 2 large pots, were apples and vegetables, brought painfully from 12 Oaks and the Mackintosh garden. Dinner for 9 hungry people, but only really enough for 2. The thought of the Yankee eating their meal made Scarlett so angry that she began to shake. She went to the cupboard and took out the heavy gun which Charles had never used. Then, quickly and silently, she ran downstairs, holding it behind her. "Who's there?" he shouted, and she stopped in the middle of the stairs. He was standing in the doorway of the dining room, his gun in one hand. "So there is somebody home," he said, smiling and putting his gun away. He walked across until he was standing below her. "All alone, little lady," he said. Before he could move again, Scarlett lifted her gun and shot him in the face. The noise filled her ears, and the man crashed backwards onto the floor. Scarlett ran down and stood over him, looking into what was left of his face. As she looked, 2 streams of blood ran across the floor, one from his face and one from the back of his head. He was dead. She had killed a man. Murder, she thought. I've done murder. Oh, this can't be happening to me. A sound behind her made Scarlett turn round. Melanie, wearing only a nightdress, was coming down the stairs. She saw the dead Yankee, then smiled proudly at Scarlett. She's like me, thought Scarlett. She would do the same thing. "Scarlett! Scarlett!" cried the frightened voices of her sisters. Then Wade began to scream. Melanie climbed back up the stairs and opened the door of the girls' room. "Don't be frightened," she said, laughing. "Your sister was trying to clean Charles's gun, and it went off and nearly frightened her to death. Wade, your mother just shot your dear pa's gun. When you get older, she'll let you shoot it too." What a cool liar, thought Scarlett. I couldn't think that quickly, but why did she lie? They've got to know I've done it. Melanie came back downstairs, although she was weak and in pain. "Scarlett, we must get him out of here," she said. "He may not be alone, and if more soldiers come and find him—" "He must be alone," said Scarlett. "I didn't see any others from the upstairs window." "Well, no one must know about it," said Melanie. "The Negroes might talk, and then they'll come and get you. We must hide him before they come back." "I could dig a hole in the corner of the garden and put him in it," said Scarlett. "But how will I get him there?" "We'll each take a leg and pull him," said Melanie. "You couldn't pull a cat. You'll kill yourself." "All right," said Melanie. "You pull him out, and I'll clean up the mess. But can't we go through his bag and his pockets first? He might have something to eat." Scarlett found a wallet inside his coat. It was full of money, United States money as well as Confederate money, and 1 $10 gold coin and 2 $5 gold coins. Melanie found some coffee in the bag, and there were rings and other small pieces of jewelry in his pockets. "A thief!" whispered Melanie. "He stole all this? I'm glad you killed him, Scarlet." No one asked where the horse came from. They were just pleased to have him. The Yankee lay covered in the hole in the corner of the garden. No ghost came to frighten Scarlet during the long nights when she lay awake afterwards. "I won't think about it," she said to herself. But whenever she had to do something difficult after this, she thought, "I've done murder, so I can do this." Chapter 12. Peace at Last. By May 1865, the war was over, and the Confederacy had lost. The dream they had loved and hoped for, the cause which took the lives of their friends, was finished. But Scarlet cried no tears. She simply thought, "Thank God! Now the cow won't be stolen. Now the horse is safe. Now I won't be afraid to drive round the country looking for something to eat. And if Ashley is alive, he'll be coming home." In that warm summer after peace came, a stream of Confederate soldiers came through Tara on their way home. Most were walking, although a few lucky ones had a horse. They asked each soldier for news of Ashley, and Sue Ellen asked about Mr. Kennedy, but none of them knew anything. Then, one afternoon, Uncle Peter surprised them all by arriving from Atlanta. He came on an old horse and brought news of Aunt Pitty, who wanted Melanie and Scarlet to come back to live with her again. He also brought a letter from Ashley. "He's coming home," Uncle Peter told them. "He's alive." Melanie fainted, but Scarlet took the letter and opened it quickly. She recognized Ashley's writing. "My love, I am coming home to you." Tears filled her eyes so that she could not read any more. Holding the letter, she ran to her mother's room while the others tried to help Melanie. She shut the door, then, crying and laughing and kissing the letter, she whispered, "My love, I am coming home to you." When weeks went by and Ashley did not come, Scarlet began to worry that something had happened to him along the way. The never-ending line of soldiers went through, and Scarlet's heart began to grow hard. They were eating the food which was meant for the mouths of Tara. Food was hard to get, and the money in the Yankee's wallet would not last forever. Will Benteen was a soldier who was very ill when he arrived. One of his legs finished at the knee, and a roughly cut wooden leg was fitted to it. He looked like a poor farmer, not a plantation owner, but this did not stop the girls working to save his life. Then, one day, he opened his light blue eyes and saw Corinne sitting beside him. "Then you weren't a dream after all," he said. Will had owned a small farm in Georgia and 2 Negroes. He knew that his slaves were free now, and that his farm was burned, but these things did not seem to worry him. "You've been good to me, Miss Scarlet," he said, "and if you'll let me, I'm going to stay here and help you with all the work until I've paid you back. I can't ever pay it all, because there's no price a man can pay for his life. So he stayed, and slowly and quietly, a large part of the work and worry of Tara passed from Scarlet to him. It was a warm September afternoon, and Will was sitting on the front steps of Tara, talking to Scarlet. Melanie came out to join them. Although she did her share of the work at Tara, she was thin and never completely well. Will was talking about his trip to Fayetteville that morning, when he looked along the road leading to Tara. "Another soldier," he said. Scarlet looked and saw a man with a beard, wearing the usual gray and blue uniform, which was dusty and torn. "Oh, I hope he isn't very hungry," she said. "He'll be hungry," said Will. Melanie stood up. "I'll tell Dilsey to—" She stopped so suddenly that Scarlet turned to look at her. Melanie's hand was at her throat, and her face was white. "She's going to faint," thought Scarlet, jumping to her feet. But Melanie was running down the steps, her arms stretching out towards the soldier. And then Scarlet knew the truth. The man lifted his face and looked towards the house, as if he was too tired to take another step. Melanie, crying out, threw herself into his arms. Scarlet took 2 steps forward, but Will stopped her. "Don't spoil it," he said quietly. "Let me go, you fool! Let me go! It's Ashley!" Will held her. "He's her husband, ain't he said calmly. Scarlet looked at him angrily, and in the quiet kindness of his eyes she saw understanding and pity.